It's complete. He's to the 10, to the 5. He's over for a touchdown. Another touchdown for Notre Dame.
Does Notre Dame win them all?
Not always, of course, but the spirit is always there. The mystic Notre Dame spirit that has helped carry the Fighting Irish to dramatic victory so many times.
And that helps to explain why Notre Dame has become the Camelot of football, not only to its own people, but to millions who have never seen the Golden Dome, which shines in sunlight and in moonlight from the top of the university main building.
Well, perhaps the story of that spirit can best be told by telling of some of the men who made it possible.
When this century was young, back before the First World War, 4 young men came down from the Iron Peninsula of Michigan to South Bend.
Their names were Gipp, Larson, Wilcox, and Hartley Anderson, who would become affectionately known as just plain Hunk.
Of Hunk Anderson, a rugged guard who would rather block than make a speech, they tell of the time he stood up at a football rally and he bellowed,
"You do the best you can, and I'll do the best we can."
Hunk Anderson's accidental phrase was pure golden truth, because it touched upon one of the great strengths of Notre Dame, the warm rapport among all Notre Dame men, students and faculty, administrators and alumni, everywhere.
To do his best was the only way Hunk Anderson knew. In 1931, when all the nation was in mourning for the great Newt Rockne, Hunk Anderson was the man they named to do his best in Rockne's place.
In the next 3 years, with stars such as George Milinkovic, Nordy Hoffman, and Tommy Yar, Notre Dame teams were to win 16 games, lose 9, tie 2. Perhaps the highlight of Hunk's career was the Army game played in New York's Yankee Stadium on December 2nd, 1933.
In the first half, Army scored twice and threatened a third, and halftime was a dismal time for Notre Dame followers, especially so for the haunted young warriors in the gloomy cavern of the dressing room.
But then the ghosts of tradition came, the spirit of Rockne, of the Four Horsemen, of Red Salmon, Notre Dame's first great football star, of George Gipp, of the Five Miller Brothers, perhaps from as far back as the French founders of the American school with the Irish nickname.
This day, the spirit was embodied in players like Wayne Milner, Moose Krause, and Nick Lucas. In the final period, they did everything on offense and defense human players could do.
Time running out in the ball game. Notre Dame, 4th down coming up. Lucas back in punt formation for Notre Dame, standing on the Notre Dame 20-yard line. Buckler back in safety for the Army on his own 35. Here's the pass. Lucas gets it off. It's a tremendous punt going deep into Army territory. It's over Buckler's head. It comes down on the 20. It's rolling toward the goal line. It's down by a Notre Dame man on the Army 8-yard line. Moose Krause was the man who downed the ball for the Irish. What a kick. A 72-yard boot by Nick Lucas. This place is in an uproar. Army is leading 12-7, but now they're backed up to their own goal line. Army's ball, 1st and 10 from their 8. The cadets are taking their time coming out of the huddle. They line up single wing right. Notre Dame using a tight defense with a 7-man line. Johnson has the ball. He hits the left side of the line. He gets nowhere as they pile him up. Krause made that stop for Notre Dame. It's a loss of a yard on the play. That Krause has been a thorn in Army's side all afternoon. 2nd down and 11 for Army on their own 7-yard line. Army leads 12-7 late in the 4th quarter. The cadets are back in the huddle right on the goal line. Army's coming out of it, up to the line of scrimmage. Army's going into kick formation. Simons is back to kick for Army in his end zone. Lucas dropping back to receive for Notre Dame on about the Army 45. Here's the pass from center. Simon, the kick is blocked. The kick is blocked by Wayne Milner. The ball is rolling in the end zone. There's a scramble for the ball. It's recovered by Notre Dame. A touchdown for Notre Dame. Let's see who recovered that ball. It's Milner, the man who blocked the kick.
The final score was Notre Dame 13, Army 12. And the Subway alumni departed Yankee Stadium with faith renewed.
So completely has the University of Notre Dame dramatized the American dream that if it didn't exist, someone would have to go out and invent it.
Fortunately, someone did. Father Edward Sorin, a young member of the Congregation of the Holy Cross, who with a band of religious companions from France, founded the school in the then wilderness near South Bend, Indiana, back in the year 1842.
Like so many a lusty American infant who would grow up to be a credit to our nation, little Notre Dame was born in a log cabin, and the doors were open to one and all, including the Irish. It's ironical that the good French priest had certain reservations about that species. The Irish, he liked to say, are not inclined to obedience.
There's a legend that Notre Dame always produces its man for the occasion, on or off the field. But seldom has that legend been put to a greater test than during the football season of 1963.
For 121 years, Notre Dame had survived poverty, fire, war, pestilence, and depression. But the season of '63 was something else.
1963 was the year that the once fabulous Fighting Irish posted one of the most discouraging records in its football history. 7 losses and 2 wins, finishing far, far away from their old position as number 1 in the nation.
Clearly, it was time for the right man to be produced.
Then suddenly he appeared. Ara Parsegan, a graduate of Miami University and Oxford, Ohio. For the first time in almost 50 years, Notre Dame went outside its family for a man to coach the team. But Parsegan was not a stranger. As head coach at Northwestern, Ara's Wildcats had clawed Notre Dame to defeat 4 years in a row. In 1964, Ara Parsegan took virtually the same Irish squad, which had lost 7 games the year before and won his first 9 games. In Ara's first year, only one team was able to stop the Irish, the Trojans of Southern California, with a 20-17 win in the last minutes of the game.
Despite the solitary loss, Notre Dame had staged the comeback of the year under Ara Parsegan, and honors poured in.
Ara was elected Coach of the Year along with Frank Broyles of Arkansas. Johnny Hewitt won the coveted Heisman Trophy, and then Jack Snow and captain and linebacker Jim Carroll also were named All-Americans, as were Kevin Hardy and Tony Carey.
And at the annual dinner of the Football Hall of Fame in New York, Notre Dame was awarded the prestigious General MacArthur Bowl as the outstanding team of the year.
So began the era of Ara.
Now it's 1969, and the era of Ara is 6 years old. In those 6 years, Ara Parsegan's Irish teams have won 48, lost 8, and tied 4.
3 teams have given the Irish trouble in recent years: Purdue, Southern California, and Michigan State. In 1966, no season ever got off to a worse start than when Purdue sophomore Leroy Keys recovered a fumbled ball to run 94 yards for a touchdown in the opening minutes against the Irish. But Notre Dame's Nick Eddy ran the kickoff back 96 yards to tie the score. This was the day that Ara Parsegan unveiled the dynamic duo, passer Terry Hanratty and end Jim Seymour, who would rewrite Notre Dame's passing records.
The score is tied 7-7. It's Notre Dame's ball, 3rd down and 15 to go on their own 16-yard line. Hanratty is behind the center. Hanratty is dropping back to pass. He's looking for a receiver. He's being rushed. Hanratty scrambles. He throws. It's a long, arching pass. It's complete. Jim Seymour has it. He's in the clear. He'll go all the way. Seymour scores for Notre Dame. That play covered 84 yards.
This now famous Irish passing combination wrapped up the game with 2 later touchdown passes as the Irish won it 26-14. They performed as few sophomores ever have. Hanratty completed 16 passes for 304 yards. Seymour set 2 single-game Notre Dame records with 13 passes caught for 276 yards. Jack Mullenkopf, the Purdue coach, put it well when he said, "One guy defending against Seymour is just not in the cards."
The Irish followed with 7 other wins, with no games even close.
The 9th game of the 1966 season was the big one. Notre Dame was to face Michigan State, which it had defeated only twice in its last 14 games. Both teams were unbeaten, and the whole nation awaited the outcome.
The Michigan Spartans scored 10 points in the first period after Hanratty had left the game with injuries. He was replaced by Coley O'Brien, whose father had commanded an aircraft carrier, and Coley did not give up the ship.
O'Brien threw 2 quick passes to Gladjo, and Bob took the second over for a touchdown. Joe Azzaro added the extra point, and it was 10-7. Now the stubborn Notre Dame defensive unit was containing the Spartans. All-Americans Jim Lynch and Pete Duranko and safety man Tom Shane were breaking up the Michigan State attack, and Kevin Hardy was keeping them off balance with his fine left-footed punter. Late in the third quarter, O'Brien completed a series of passes to Larry Conjar, Rocky Blyer, and Dave Haley to put the ball in a position for Azzaro to boot a 47-yard field goal to tie the score. Now, neither side could gain, and time ran out with the Irish in possession of the ball. And that's the way it ended, 10-10.
The following week, Ara Parsegan's Notre Dame team closed its season by beating Southern California 51-0, winning the Irish their first national championship since 1949.
Led by quarterback Joe Theismann, Notre Dame opened the 1969 season with a solid 35-10 victory over Northwestern. Then they lost to Purdue. Coming up was Michigan State. The final score, Notre Dame 42, Michigan State 28. The really big one of 69 came 2 weeks later against the Trojans of Southern California.
Southern California was number 3 in the ranking and Notre Dame 11th. At the beginning, it looked like a Trojan runaway, but the Irish defense, aided by a little Irish luck and a big Mike McCoy, prevented a score, and it was 0-0 at halftime.
In the third period, Notre Dame put on its first sustained march and took a 7-0 lead. But the Trojans came back with a long march of their own, tied the score, and after intercepting a Notre Dame pass, took the lead 14-7.
Now the ghosts of tradition were to rise again. In the final period, Notre Dame tied the score, dominated the play. In the closing minutes, missed victory by inches when a 48-yard field goal attempt hit the crossbar and bounced back onto the plate.
The first mention of football in the annals of Notre Dame appeared in 1876, 3 years after the obscure school in South Bend became the first Catholic college to offer a course in civil engineering. The game they played was really more like soccer than the game as we know it today, with 42 men on a side and a barrel of apples for a prize. It was duly noted that the first contest ended in a tie and that everybody got an apple.
The so-called new style of football didn't reach Notre Dame until some 11 years later in 1887, when a band of tourists from the University of Michigan arrived in carriages to teach their Irish neighbors the new rugby style of football that had been adopted in the East. Michigan won 8-0.
Notre Dame's first big coaching name, who arrived in 1896, was Frank Herring. Notre Dame's first great football star was Louis Salmon, called Red Salmon by friends and fans. Red set a record that no Irish player has ever been able to match. Playing 4 seasons between 1900 and 1903, he scored 250 points in 38 games. None of the subsequent great Notre Dame stars have ever topped that.
Notre Dame's first milestone victory came in 1909, 11-3 upset of Michigan. The Irish were coached that year by Frank Shorty Longman.
Notre Dame's next coach of note was Jack Marks, a Dartmouth fellow who in 1911 first introduced speed and deception into offense and generally prepared the way for Notre Dame football as we know it today. But it was Jesse Harper, who followed Marks, who masterminded one of the most historic moments in all football.
On November 1st, 1913, at West Point, in the first game Notre Dame ever played against Army, Harper used the forward pass for the first time as a major offensive weapon in an important game. Notre Dame shocked the gridiron world as a young fellow named Newt Rockne caught 14 out of 17 passes thrown by his good friend and roommate, Gus Garay, to beat the Army 35-13 and launched the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame on the most exciting victory march in the history of football.